Warning: this video discusses an adult topic with adult terminology some might find unsuitable. Viewer discretion is advised. There's one portion of Steve Ditko's career that is rather curious and difficult to investigate. There are some projects that aren't credited to him, but they are clearly his work. Allegedly, during the very few times he was asked about these curious oddities, Ditko denied any involvement, even though a casual observer, who is only slightly familiar with Ditko's style, would call shenanigans on that denial. So what is this work, and why did Ditko disown it? I'm going to insert myself for a moment. What started out as a simple look at a hidden part of Ditko's career ended up sending me down a variety of rabbit holes, so there are a few deviations here and there. But these avenues had to be explored because they were too interesting not to address. Additionally, for those on YouTube, to get an actual video with images illustrating the topic of discussion, I would suggest going to my Patreon and signing up. The uncensored video is available there. I dislike paywalling content, but this is a subject the platform is hostile towards, even though I believe I've tastefully covered the topic. Alright, let's get into it. Between 1958 and 1968, Ditko shared studio space with another artist, Stanton. They met during art school, and both were taught by Jerry Robinson, an artist who, until recently, wasn't officially recognized for his numerous contributions to Batman. At some undetermined point after this meeting, they decided to share a studio. Apparently, they got along very well, and Stanton only left the studio because he remarried and decided to move. Otherwise, while Spider-Man was being created and then becoming a huge success, Stanton was literally sitting across from Ditko, providing input when asked, and seeing a billion-dollar concept take shape. Stanton was, let's say, a very specialized artist. His body of work was focused on one specific area of interest: hot, dominating babes. Although, early on, he seemed to do a lot of comics with women wrestling. Still, thematically, they were aggressive women who enjoyed humiliating their partners and making them suffer. If I were to categorize it using the terminology of the day, it was cheesecake smut with an elaborate BDSM edge. Through a modern lens, it's not very explicit, in the sense that there's no huge throbbing penises and various scenes of penetration. But it is definitely explicit in its depictions of bondage and its various related activities. Along with illustrations, Stanton took a number of photographs and made numerous 8mm stag films. I'm unsure how to characterize this venture, other than to say he found models to participate and create specialized content for customers. All contained the theme he was most interested in: women dominating others. Basically, he was an underground version of OnlyFans decades before it existed. Some have implied Stanton's bondage fetish can be seen in Ditko's work. A quick scan of the early Doctor Strange material does have some imaginative bondage traps. But overall, there are only 8 obvious instances of bondage in the entire Strange Tales run. Yes, I looked. So if there was an influence, it was minor at best, and the light bondage elements were relevant to the plot. They aren't suddenly inserted for the sake of having someone in restraints. As for their working relationship, Stanton stated, quote, "Ditko would ink for me. He inked Confidential TV for me. I like to draw. I'm too impatient to ink. He was a better inker than me, so I let him ink. He thought my stuff was funny. We'd laugh a lot. We'd give each other ideas and characters. My Aunt May is the Aunt May in Spider-Man." Unquote. Conveniently, this brings us to Spider-Man. Some make the case that Stanton had a direct or noticeable influence on that character. The book, Stanton and the Bizarre Underground, is a proponent of this possibility. At points, Stanton himself has claimed to have suggested the web shooters and Spider-Man's unique hand gestures. However, Stanton also, unequivocally, stated that Spider-Man was solely Ditko's creation. Regardless, the evidence supporting some elements, such as Spider-Man's web shooters and Aunt May, are anecdotal and hardly conclusive. The point of this deviation is not to suggest Stanton's DNA is in Spider-Man. It's to illustrate they frequently interacted while working, and it's very likely they influenced one another's work, both directly and indirectly. However, it's that direct involvement that's the point of this essay. According to Stanton, quote, "I made Sweeter Gwen from John Willie's Gwendolyn. I went and did tight penciling, but then got another commission and I had to stop on Sweeter Gwen. I asked Steve Ditko to ink it for me and we'd split the money 50-50. So then we storyboarded like we used to do for Spider-Man. We gave ideas to each other. We came up with a very beautiful story." Unquote. Sweeter Gwen is one of the few known pieces where Ditko definitely did some work. In fact, it looks like Ditko did more than just ink the comic. It looks like he ghosted at least a portion of it. Although, the figure arrangements do look like they were, at the very least, roughed in by Stanton. But it looks like Ditko added his own style to a fair amount of the artwork. The faces and hands have that distinct Ditko look. The male characters are definitely drawn by Ditko's hand, and the lettering resembles Ditko's own lettering style. As for the plot, such as it is, it involves the kidnapping of Sweeter Gwen in order to torture her and find the location of a secret cave filled with jewels. It's a pretty thin setup that is merely an excuse to put Gwen in elaborate BDSM gear. That being said, it's a rather madcap romp and very lighthearted. Sweeter Gwen is ridiculously oblivious to the reality of her situation, and her captors are bumbling, aggressive idiots. There's also a subplot of a rival dom dame wanting to foil the plot going on. It's very nearly a coherent story. Through a modern lens, one could make an argument it is both misogynistic and empowering. Also, due to its comedic treatment of abduction, possibly rather insensitive. Those are aspects I am unequipped to discuss in any capacity, so I can only note them and move forward. Another piece, On a Kinky Hook, does look like a job where Ditko mainly did the inks. He doesn't seem as present in that piece of work. The same can be said about Confidential TV and Black Widow Sorority. The latter being of particular interest due to one of the women wearing a spiderweb outfit with a spider logo that bears more than a little resemblance to a certain superhero's logo. Other than a few images, I could not find the actual story. Battling bondage babes is a borderline possibility. The faces and the inking looks very similar to Ditko's early style, but it's difficult to make a definitive conclusion. In fact, there are other examples where Ditko's hand is probably on Stanton's work, and I suspect there's many more examples waiting to be discovered. At this point, one might ask, what did Ditko have to say about this work? The answer to that is obvious. Ditko notoriously didn't do interviews or discuss his work. So there's no direct quotes from Ditko on any of the material he potentially did for Stanton. Indirectly, there are a few anecdotes, two of which come from Strange and Stranger by fellow Canadian Blake Bell. According to the editor, Kat Ironwood, who was compiling a Ditko checklist in the early 80s, quote, "Ditko denied that he had done that material. I was shocked. I felt that he lied." Unquote. According to the inker, Joe Rubinstein, he asked Ditko about a fetish story with his inking style on it, and Ditko allegedly said, "I dare anyone to prove I inked that." Another quote of a similar nature comes from an article by Bernie Bubness, a man who frequently visited Ditko's studio between 1962 and 2017. According to Bubness, quote, "When I mentioned to Ditko that I wanted to put together an article and would have to ask him some questions, he pointed to Eric Stanton and said, 'Don't mention him.' They both laughed, but I knew he meant it." Unquote. Of course, it has to be mentioned, if this were a court of law, none of these quotes would be admissible as evidence. They may very well reflect Ditko's opinion, but there doesn't appear to be anything directly from Ditko to support them. Another final point of interest. Some have suggested that Sweeter Gwen was the inspiration for Gwen Stacy. However, this is probably coincidental. Both are named Gwen and they're both blonde, but they wear their hair differently and their personalities couldn't be more different. To be polite, Sweeter Gwen is an airhead. Gwen Stacy is considerably more intelligent and has a certain degree of confidence. At best, one could speculate that Ditko had the name Gwen on his brain when he created the character for Spider-Man. It's a pretty big stretch to suggest there's an obvious, direct link between them if you compare the two characters. In the end, what does all this mean? Obviously, that's an area of speculation. Considering the era this material was produced, the late 50s and 60s, and the focus of the artwork, work of this nature was likely embarrassing to Ditko. Not to mention, there's a stigma around producing adult content that's only purpose is to titillate. Even more specifically, this was some pretty kinky, highly specialized work exploring a BDSM scenario. Many see comics of this nature as having no artistic merit, and an even larger amount would say this work was beneath the skills of someone as established as Ditko. So it's not unreasonable to speculate Ditko didn't want the reputation of being a producer of trashy sleaze. Furthermore, it's not a stretch to theorize if this work was widely known, it would limit his employment opportunities and possibly brand him as a pervert. And finally, as his adherence to objectivism deepened and he clarified certain parameters, it could have been he saw this work as not fitting within that belief system. It was a mistake he corrected by ignoring its existence. Again, that's all speculative. Other than observation and anecdotes, there is literally nothing on the record that reflects Ditko's actual opinion. Thank you for watching or listening, whatever the case may be. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, leave a like, and a comment. Additional thanks to all my fine supporters on YouTube and Patreon. I appreciate every single one of you. Extra special thanks to John Nowukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Phil Sagan, Corey Drew, L.S. Greger, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, Johnny Lim, Steve White, Taylor Dull, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Hey look, a playlist. Check it out for a variety of fine video products. Until next time.